fascinating paradox of our modern world. We're going to look at how our deep, everyday reliance on hyper-specialization might actually be fracturing our overall understanding of reality. You know, we live in an era that absolutely rewards the specialist, but we really need to step back and ask ourselves a pretty crucial question about the price we're paying for all this hyper-focused knowledge.
We usually assume that the deeper you go into a subject, the clearer reality gets, right? Well, what if being incredibly knowledgeable in one isolated area actually distorts your worldview? What if focusing so intensely on a single puzzle piece makes it literally impossible to see the puzzle itself?
Let's start with Section 1, the specialist's dilemma.
Think about how society's industrialized. The division of labor turned people into absolute masters of isolated domains. On the one hand, you have this massive economic triumph, economic productivity. You get paid incredibly well to be the absolute best at your specific micro-role. But then, on the flip side, we have fragmented understanding. By hyper-specializing, we lose sight of the interconnected big picture. And that creates a massive cognitive disaster upstream when we actually try to evaluate reality as a cohesive whole.
This leads us to a pretty fundamental truth about our current intellectual culture. We're trading breadth for depth. We become absolutely brilliant at analyzing tiny slivers of information, but we are essentially blind to the whole. We've trained modern minds to focus so deeply on localized data inside their professional silos that, honestly, we've kind of lost the cognitive muscle required to see how those individual parts actually connect to one another.
Which brings us to Section 2, the architecture of an illusion. To really wrap our heads around the danger of this fragmented thinking, let's look at the ancient Indian parable of the blind men and the elephant. 6 observers step up, reach out, and touch one isolated part of a massive, multidimensional entity. Immediately, because of their partial observation and their own built-in calibration bias, they form an absolute conclusion based strictly on their isolated point of contact. And as you'll see, this creates a fundamentally distorted total worldview.
So take the first observer. He reaches out, feels this twisting muscular trunk, and boom, he confidently declares it is a snake. And you know what? From his specific vantage point, this makes perfect sense. But wait, the second guy grabs the smooth, sharp tusk. He totally disagrees. His data is telling him a completely different story, leading him to say, no way, it is a spear. And he's not hallucinating. His sensory input perfectly matches the tactile properties of a spear. And as we quickly go around the group, the reality fracture just deepens. The guy touching the side feels a wall. The one hugging the leg, he shorts a tree. The ear feels exactly like a fan, and the tail is obviously a rope. Every single person is constructing a wildly different, totally contradictory reality just based on their tiny slice of sensory input. Now here's where it gets really interesting. It's this concept called local coherence. Basically, every single one of these observers is locally right. Their conclusions are totally logical within their own narrow silo of space. It is entirely possible to analyze facts flawlessly inside a tiny professional domain and remain perfectly logical, so long as you stay within your restricted vantage point. But the system completely breaks down when that local part is treated as the absolute whole. That's what we call global incoherence. If you take these perfectly logical, locally coherent models, these specialized professional conclusions, and jam them together outside their isolated domains, they collectively collapse. Individually, they make total sense. Collectively, they're absurd. Just look at the underlying logic of reductionism laid bare here. A wall, a rope, a snake, and a spear literally cannot logically coexist inside the same animal. It's impossible. Relying on a mere sliver of information, no matter how deep your expertise in that sliver is, pretty much guarantees you're going to be completely wrong about the true nature of reality.
So moving into Section 3, activating systems thinking.
How do we actually fix this? Well, we have to activate systems thinking. If you really care about finding the truth, this isn't just an optional upgrade, it's an absolute epistemic requirement. A viable worldview just cannot be compartmentalized into isolated professional specializations. We have to force ourselves to see how independent domains, like economics, morality, psychology, and causal physics, actually interact at the foundational upstream level. They have to integrate.
See, reductionist analysis just checks facts in a vacuum, completely isolated from other domains. But systems thinking, it stops staring at individual data points and starts tracking those upstream feedback loops and cross-domain dependencies. This is exactly how systems thinking exposes the glaring contradictions hiding inside isolated professional specializations. It forces the expert out of their comfy silo to see how their specific domain might literally violently clash with the reality of another.
And that brings us to a massive takeaway. The true test of any knowledge system's structural integrity is cross-domain consistency. Why does this actually matter to you? Because a belief system might work beautifully in one localized area, but if it contradicts another, it's just false. If a worldview fits your economic model perfectly, but totally violates basic human psychology or moral intuitions, that system is locally coherent, but it is globally broken.
Which leads to our final section, the core data constraint.
Here's the catch, though. Even if you completely master systems thinking and build this beautiful, integrated latticework of mental models, your system is still only as good as the data that feeds it. High-quality inputs let your mind build accurate representations of reality. But I gotta warn you, if distorted, incomplete, or intentionally framed data enters your system, your perfectly logical brain will process those flaws flawlessly, and you'll spit out totally false conclusions. Classic garbage in, garbage out. And honestly, this dynamic right here is exactly why we struggle so much to communicate. Think about the root of most human disagreements. We spend all this energy yelling at the level of conclusions, but the true disagreements, they aren't really about facts. They sit way deeper. They sit at the level of foundational assumptions. And those assumptions were shaped by biased, siloed, locally coherent thinking long before the argument even started. Which leaves us with this final, profound thought to carry forward. Truth lies not in the parts, but in the whole. Truth is never going to be discovered by just collecting a pile of isolated downstream facts, and it definitely won't be found crouching comfortably inside a single professional specialization. Truth is only realized when every piece of the puzzle coheres without contradiction, forcing us to actually calibrate to the balance of the whole. So the next time you are absolutely 100% certain you're looking at a snake, maybe just ask yourself, have I stepped back far enough to see the elephant?